Welcome to the African History Network show right here on 910 AM, the Superstation. I'm your host, Brother Michael Imhotep. It is Sunday, February 16th, 2020, and we are live. Welcome to the African History Network show. Hope everybody's doing well tonight. We are halfway through African American History Month, and I was speaking at St. Francis Missionary Baptist Church today for their African American History Month program, 2 p.m. to 5 p.m. And after that, I ran right over to the Charles H. Wright Museum of African American History because my main man, Dr. Molefi Kete Asante, was speaking there today, this evening, thanks to Dr. Charles Farrell. Well, not Dr., but he should be Dr., but Charles Farrell, I should say, thanks to Charles Farrell. And you saw us broadcast on our Facebook fan page, the African History Network, Dr. Molefi Kete Asante's presentation. So if you missed that, after you finish listening to this show, go to our fan page, the African History Network, and you can watch Dr. Molefi Kete Asante's fantastic presentation he did dealing with African Americans and the transatlantic slave trade and the vote and understanding politics. All right, so on tonight's show, we have a lot to cover. It's been a very, very busy week, an exhausting week. If you're keeping up with what's going on in Washington and Trump being more emboldened because he was acquitted by the cowardly Republican senators in the U.S. Senate. I told you what was going to happen. People didn't want to listen. They thought I was playing games. They thought I was playing in 2016. When I warned you about them, they didn't want to listen. Okay. All right. You'll learn. So on tonight's show, on Netflix, there's a new documentary called Who Killed Malcolm X? And it deals with the Malcolm X assassination, February 21st, 1965. You know, we're coming up on the anniversary of his assassination. And Malcolm X assassination case is going to be reinvestigated by the team that exonerated the Central Park Five. We're going to talk some about Who Killed Malcolm X. There's a really good article in the New York Times about this, and in ABC News has an article, Malcolm X's assassination case to be reinvestigated by a team that exonerated the Central Park Five. And then the TV show Godfather of Harlem. You've heard me talk about the TV show Godfather of Harlem, right? And it deals with Bumpy Johnson and Adam Clayton Powell and Malcolm X. It's set in Harlem in 1963. Well, it has been renewed for a second season. We posted an article about this on our Facebook fan page, the African History Network, the African History Network. If you don't already follow us on Facebook, be sure to do that, the African History Network on Facebook. So we'll talk a little bit about that. Godfather of Harlem gets renewed for a second season. Okay, and we're going to talk some about Adam Clayton Powell Jr. FaceToFaceAfrica.com had a really good article about Adam Clayton Powell Jr., first African-American congressman from New York. Okay. Speaking of New York, this past week, polls came out showing that Mayor Mike Bloomberg, former mayor of New York, is cutting into Vice President Joe Biden's lead when it comes to African-Americans, right? But then also this past week, he received more criticism for stop and frisk in New York, and he's being questioned about stop and frisk, coming under more scrutiny about stop and frisk, and then also a audio of a speech he gave back in 2015, I think it was, where he's talking about redlining, Mayor Mike Bloomberg talking about redlining and the housing crisis, the 2008 housing crisis. And some people are saying it seems like he is blaming the housing crisis on African Americans who were pushed into predatory loans. Okay, so he's coming under more scrutiny about that. We're going to talk some about that. Michael Bloomberg's past statements on stop and frisk and redlining come back to haunt him. But something else that was very interesting took place is that Donald Trump tried to attack Michael Bloomberg on Twitter about the comments about stop and frisk, but he deleted the tweet. Trump deleted the tweet. Why did he delete the tweet? Is it possible because Trump remembered, or somebody reminded Donald Trump that he actually supported stop and frisk? Is that why? And then not only that, when Trump was running for president, Trump said that they should use stop and frisk in Chicago. Do you remember that? So it's hard for you. It's hard for Trump. Now other people may be able to attack him on, other people may be able to attack Michael Bloomberg on Stop and Frisk. But Trump ain't the one to attack Michael Bloomberg on Stop and Frisk because you supported the program. Not only that, you said that they should use it in Chicago. Okay? So we'll discuss that a little bit as well. So more people, more African Americans are coming out in support with Michael Bloomberg, coming out in support for Michael Bloomberg, I should say. And people, you know, African Americans want to support a winner. The number one goal is to get Trump out of office. Bottom line, number one goal is to get Trump out of office. Some people supporting Biden, some people are supporting Elizabeth Warren. We saw that this past week, Andrew Yang dropped out of the race. I knew that was coming. Okay. We also saw Senator Michael Bennet dropped out of the race. If you didn't know who he was, that's one of the reasons why he dropped out of the race. Democratic Senator Michael Bennet dropped out of the race also this past week. If you didn't know who he was, that's one of the reasons why he dropped out of the race. So we'll discuss that. And then at the State of the Union address, you know, we did fact checking on some of the comments that Trump made at the State of the Union address. He told all these lies, right? You remember that. There was an African-American veteran there. And Trump praised him. This African-American veteran got a job. He was homeless. He got a job at a company that's in an opportunity zone, things like that. Well, the information surfaced this week that the way Trump explained what happened, that's not really what happened. Because this company is not even in an opportunity zone. So remember the black veteran that Trump used as a political prop at the State of the Union address? Turns out Trump got the story wrong. But also the story dealing with the fourth grader, Janaea. And he talked about she was going to a failing government school, things like that. Well, Janaea enrolled in a charter school that's part of a very successful charter school network. She enrolled in that in September. So what are you talking about? I told you. Go back and listen to last Sunday's broadcast. It was, February 9th? Go back and listen to that broadcast. I talked about how Donald Trump used African Americans as political props. Okay? Use us to score political points with. And when you go through and research that stuff, that, you know, and then you study his policies. You study actually what he does. You start seeing what I'm talking about. And then last week, well, actually this past week, I did a Facebook Live broadcast dealing with Vicente Guerrero. And Vicente Guerrero was the second president of Mexico and the first president of African descent of Mexico. Okay, so we're going to talk some about Vicente Guerrero because he abolishes slavery in Mexico when he becomes president as well. He's a very, very historic figure in Mexico. So we'll deal with that on tonight's show. So on the African History Network show, we focus on educating, empowering, and inspiring people of African descent throughout the diaspora and around the world. Because right now it's correct wrong behavior. What you do for yourself, what you do to yourself, and what you allow other people to do to you and get away with is based upon what you think about yourself. What you think about yourself is based upon what you have been taught about yourself. What you've been taught about yourself is based upon everything you've read, heard, and seen about yourself. Sign up for our email newsletter. Text the word Kemet, K-E-M-E-T, to 22828. Sign up for our email newsletter. Also go to our website, AfricanHistoryNetwork.com. AfricanHistoryNetwork.com. Sign up for our email newsletter there as well. Okay. If you like this type of information, you can donate to the African History Network, paypal.me/the AHN show, paypal.me/the AHN show, and also through Cash App, $the AHN show through Cash App. Okay. Visit our website, AfricanHistoryNetwork.com. I'll have information of where I'm speaking. This week, I'm speaking at a church next Sunday. I don't remember where it is. I don't have my calendar in front of me. If you want me to do a presentation for your group or organization, email me at customerservice@AfricanHistoryNetwork.com, customerservice@AfricanHistoryNetwork.com. All right? Okay. So if we look at this article from New York Times. New York Times had an article from February 6, 2020. Who really killed Malcolm X? 55 years later, the case may be reopened. And then ABC News had an article from February 12th, 2020, as well, that we'll talk about. So for more than half a century, scholars have maintained that prosecutors convicted the wrong men in the assassination of Malcolm X. Now, 55 years after that bloody afternoon in February 21st, 1965, the Manhattan District Attorney's Office is reviewing whether to reinvestigate Malcolm X's assassination. Some new evidence comes from a 6-part documentary called Who Killed Malcolm X, which is streaming right now on Netflix. It started streaming February 7th, 2020 on Netflix. And this documentary posits that 2 of the men convicted could not have been at the scene of the Malcolm X's assassination that day. Instead, it points the finger at 4 members of a Nation of Islam mosque in Newark, New Jersey, depicting their involvement as an open secret in their city. One even appeared in a 2010 campaign for then Newark, New Jersey Mayor Cory Booker, who's now Senator Cory Booker. So Rachel Dretzin, D-R-E-T-Z-I-N, is a director of the documentary, along with Phil Bertelsen, B-E-R-T-E-L-S-E-N. And Rachel Dretzin said, what got us hooked was the notion that the likely shotgun assassin of Malcolm X was living in plain sight in Newark, New Jersey, and that many people knew of his involvement, and he was uninvestigated, unprosecuted, unquestioned. So the case has long tempted scholars, historians, etc., who see a conspiracy hidden in unreleased government documents. A detective on the case named Anthony V. Bouza, B-O-U-Z-A, I think it's pronounced, wrote flatly a few years ago, quote, the investigation was botched. The investigation was botched, okay? Now, I haven't seen the documentary yet. I'm going to watch it this week. I've heard a lot about it. I saw Professor James Small did an interview on a podcast. There's an interview on YouTube. It's about 38 minutes, something like that, of a really good interview that was done with Professor James Small. I'm going to bring Professor Small on some point soon so we can talk about this as well. Professor Small was a bodyguard for Malcolm's sister Ella for 18 years, okay? And he has some insight into this as well. And we also know Professor Small is a consultant on the Epics series, Godfather of Harlem. When you watch the credits, you'll see his name in the credits. So the article goes on to say, yet it has never sparked the widespread obsessive interest of the Kennedy assassination or the equally brazen killing of Tupac Shakur. Attempts to reopen the case to uncover the possible roles of the FBI, New York Police Department, and the Nation of Islam leadership, including Louis Farrakhan, have gotten nowhere. Quote, the vast majority of white opinion at that time was that this was black on black crime and maybe black extremists on black extremist crime, said David Garrow, a Pulitzer Prize winning civil rights historian. Quote, and there was for decades a consensus in black communities that we are not going to pick up that rock to see what's underneath it, end quote. Now, I know in the interview that Professor Small did, he talked about it's really the FBI and the CIA behind this, and this is what many people have said, capitalizing on tensions within the Nation of Islam, but really this was the FBI and CIA really orchestrating this, behind this. So at the time Malcolm spoke at the Audubon Ballroom on February 21st, 1965, he was a marked man, spied on by the FBI and the police, denounced as a traitor by Nation of Islam leadership, viscerally hated and beloved. Minister Farrakhan declared him, quote, worthy of death. We know Minister Farrakhan has subsequently said he had nothing to do with the assassination, just so people understand. A week before his assassination, his home in Queens, New York, was firebombed while he and his wife and 4 daughters slept inside. So seconds after Malcolm stepped to the lectern, gunfire rang out, then pandemonium. Talmadge Hayer, H-A-Y-E-R, a member of the Nation of Islam from a New Jersey mosque, was arrested fleeing the ballroom with a magazine from a handgun used in the killing. Later, the police arrested 2 men from Malcolm's former Harlem mosque, Norman 3X Butler and Thomas 15X Johnson, both known as enforcers. Now, at trial, Mr. Hare, who later became Mujahid Abdul Halim, admitted his guilt but said the other 2 men were innocent. All 3 men were convicted and received life sentences. Mr. Johnson, Thomas 15X Johnson, who became Khalil Islam, died in 2009. Norman 3X Butler, who is now Muhammad Abdul Aziz, was granted parole in 1985 and still maintains his innocence. Okay, we're going to continue this on the other side of the break. So you have one person saying the other 2 men who are fingered were totally innocent. Okay, we're going to continue this on the other side of the break. Listen to the African History Network show, 9:10 a.m. Superstation, WFDF. I'm Michael Imhotep. We'll be back in a few minutes. Welcome back to the African History Network show right here on 9:10 a.m. Superstation, WFDF. I'm your host, Brother Michael Imhotep. It is Sunday, February 16th, 2020. And we are live. Hope everybody's doing well. So right before the break, we were talking about the Netflix 6-part series, Who Killed Malcolm X. New York Times has a big article about it from February 6, 2020. And there's also a follow-up article from ABC News from their website, which is abcnews.go.com, from February 12, 2020, Malcolm X's assassination case to be reinvestigated by a team that exonerated Central Park 5. So Central Park 5 is back in the news. Malcolm X is back in the news. Mayor Bloomberg is being held accountable for stop and frisk in New York. And also Mayor Bloomberg fought the settlement, the lawsuit and the settlement paid out to the Central Park 5. And Donald Trump still maintains that the Central Park 5 were guilty and didn't agree with the lawsuit. And Donald Trump also supported stop and frisk. Okay. All right, call-in number is area code 313-778-7600. 313-778-7600 is the call-in number if you have a question or comment. If you saw I know some people on my Facebook fan page, Kizzy and Kirkland and some other people, they saw it. So if you want to give us a call, let us know what you thought about it. That's fine. 313-778-7600. I've been so busy, I haven't seen it. Saturday, I was in Chicago, speaking at Chicago State University. You know, we had Cassiopeia from the Black Mall on our show last Sunday. I was there yesterday, got back this morning, had to get ready to do a presentation, 2 p.m. to 5 p.m. St. Francis Missionary Baptist Church, then went over to the Charles H. Wright Museum to see Maleficate Asante, then ran out here to do this show. So it's been a busy weekend, okay? All right, so let's continue. We'll go to the phone lines in just a minute. 313-778-7600 is the call-in number if you have a question or comment. Let's go back to this article here from the New York Times just to give some background information on this. Okay, so the police arrested 2 men from Malcolm's former Harlem mosque, Norman 3X Butler and Thomas 15X Johnson, both known enforcers. At trial, Mr. Hare, who later became Mujahid Abdul Halim, okay, Talmadge Hare, he admitted his guilt in the assassination of Malcolm X, but he said the other 2 men, Norman 3X Butler and Thomas 15X Johnson, he said they were innocent. All 3 men were convicted and received life sentences. Mr. Johnson, who became Khalil Islam, died in 2009, and Mr. Butler, who is now Muhammad Abdul Aziz, was granted parole in 1985 and still maintains his innocence. In the late 1970s,
is he?
Mr. Halim, Mujahid Abdul Halim, who was Talmadge Hare, in the late 1970s, he filed affidavits naming 4 members of the Newark, New Jersey mosque as his partners in the crime. The civil rights lawyer William Kunstler, Kunstler, moved to reopen the case but was denied. Since then, the legwork has fallen to biographers and independent researchers, including a Washington, D.C. tour guide named Abdur Rahman Muhammad, the central figure in the new documentary series. So Mr. Muhammad said, "It bothered me that no one cared about it. I didn't get paid to do any of this. I've sold cars. I'm just a working class guy." So Mr. Muhammad in 2010 uncovered the identity of one of the supposed assassins named in Thomas Hare's affidavit, William Bradley. His name is William Bradley, who changed his name to Al-Mustafa Shabazz and was married to a prominent Newark, New Jersey activist. It was William Bradley's shotgun blast, allegedly, researchers contend, that killed Malcolm. So Mr. Shabazz dies in 2018, and he denied any involvement in the assassination of Malcolm and lived in plain sight. Senator Cory Booker said, "I knew him well," and Senator Cory Booker is in the documentary, says, "I knew him well," adding that he was not aware of Mr. Shabazz's past identity. Okay, so Mr. Muhammad published Mr. Shabazz's name and photograph on his blog in 2010, and then shared his research with the writer, author Manning Marable, who was working on his Pulitzer Prize-winning biography, Malcolm X, A Life of Reinvention. Mr. Muhammad believes that the other three men named in Thomas Hare's affidavits are dead. After the book came out, Alvin Sykes, a Kansas City activist who helped persuade the FBI and the Justice Department to create a cold case unit for civil rights era killings, lobbied federal prosecutors to reinvestigate Malcolm X's assassination. The Department of Justice declined. When Mr. Shabazz died, Al-Mustafa Shabazz, when he died, the last remaining loose end was Mr. Aziz, the former who's formerly known as Norman 3X Butler, who's now 81 years old. He served 20 years for a crime he insists he did not commit, so he still maintains his innocence to this day. Okay, he maintains his innocence that he was not involved in the assassination. Now, lawyers for Mr. Aziz now hope the Manhattan District Attorney will clear his name. A spokesman for Cyrus R. Vance Jr., okay, the Manhattan District Attorney, said in a statement that the preliminary review will, quote, will inform the office regarding what further investigative steps may be undertaken, end quote. One of the prosecutors conducting the review, his name is Peter Casolaro, Casolaro, played a vital role in throwing out the convictions of the 5 men wrongfully imprisoned for raping a jogger in Central Park in 1989. So this is dealing with the Central Park 5, okay? So Peter Casolaro played a vital role in exonerating the Central Park 5, all right? So Mr. Aziz, who declined an interview request, has said he could not have been at the Audubon Ballroom that day because security would have blocked his entry, and that anyway, he was nearly immobile from a police beating a short while before. Okay, so he's saying, 1, security would not have let me in. Okay, 2, I couldn't possibly been there. I couldn't have done what they said I did because I was immobile from a police beating shortly before Malcolm was assassinated. In the documentary, Who Killed Malcolm X, he expresses little hope for the process. He said, quote, "I just don't believe in these people." He said, "I got 20 years of my life to show that I should not have been, I got 20 years of my life to show that I should not believe in them." Now, not all people are convinced of his innocence. Carl Evans, Evanzz, author of the book The Judas Factor, The Plot to Kill Malcolm X, cited film footage that he says shows Mr. Aziz at the Audubon Ballroom and dismissed Mr. Muhammad's research as unreliable. Okay, so now I haven't seen the footage. I don't know. I'm familiar with the book The Judas Factor. I remember Carl Evans being interviewed years ago by Tony Brown on Tony Brown's Journal. Okay, now the footage he's citing, I haven't seen it. I don't know. Okay, we'll continue with the article here once we go to the phone lines. Let's go to the phone lines. Let's go to James, line 1. James, hey, thanks for holding. Welcome to the African History Network show. James, tell us where you're calling from.
I'm calling from Detroit.
From Detroit? Okay, go ahead.
Yeah. Look, I just been listening to a program for the past few weeks ago down on AM station. And my brother, you've been kicking knowledge.
Oh, thank you. Thank you.
Now, I just want to talk about, like, the election coming up. Biden and Clayton Powell running with Bloomberg.
You said Biden, and who was the second person you said? Biden and who else?
I'm saying Biden, Clinton, and Bloomberg.
Clinton?
Bloomberg. But Bill Clinton, Bloomberg, and Joe Biden. All these guys have enacted policies that has did total damage to the African American community, to the black people. You know, you take Bloomberg. Now, he's a man of Jewish descent. He understands. He's Jewish. He understands what his people went through. Now, you're going to enact some of the policies. You see suffering. You're a politician. You're supposed to recognize suffering and try to help that. You're here to help the public, help humanity. That's what your job is to do. We're going to get the OFO, how it is. But for him to sit up there, and I've been checking what you said, black people need to vote in a block. Strong, just like Donald Trump, his supporters. We tell the millions of people, they don't play. Whether he's wrong or right, they don't play. Because they come from that certain elk in America. You know what I'm saying? They come into a lot of them, and they're not dumb, a lot of them. They choose to be that way. Because you look at the history, and I'm just going to do a quick shout out. PBS, they've been putting it down on African American history, black people history in this country.
Who was that?
PBS.
PBS, yeah.
Yes, like Fannie Lou Harris. I mean, I'm not sure. Fannie Lou,
Fannie Lou Hamer. Fannie Lou Hamer.
Yes. I forgot to slow down double fast. But what I'm saying is that we have to vote in a block, okay, and don't play, because Bloomberg, he's just there. He's got billions of dollars. He wasn't no fool when he was making decisions how to make this bread. You know what I'm saying? So your
voice was a little muffled. You said, what about his bread? What'd you say?
I mean, his money. I'm sorry.
What about it? What about it?
He's making billions of dollars. He's much aware of that. But all that Stop Frisk in New York City, you know what he was doing.
Right. Well, that's what a lot of people are saying. We're going to deal with him, not in this segment. We're going to deal with him in the next segment. But that's what a lot of people are saying. And it's true that he inherited the policy from Mayor Rudy Giuliani, who was good friends with Donald Trump, running back and forth to Ukraine. But also, you could have stopped it and you didn't stop it. The reason why you eventually stopped it was because a federal judge ruled that it was unconstitutional. Now, you have other people, you have other African Americans who are saying, look, first and foremost, we need to get Donald Trump out of office, because if you think Trump is terrible in the first term, which he is, he's horrific. If he gets reelected to the second term, he's going to be totally, he will be totally off the chain. He'll be totally unhinged. Okay, so they're saying, look, so the many African Americans who are supporting Bloomberg are saying, look, we know Stop and Frisk was wrong. We ain't saying it was right. Okay, most of them say we ain't saying it was right, but we're saying, look, there are other things to consider here. Okay, so we'll deal with that in probably the second hour. We'll be able to get to Bloomberg. We're dealing with Who Killed Malcolm X right now. But thanks for calling. Keep listening. If you want to call back next hour, you can call back next hour, James. Okay. All right, let's go to Kizzy, line 2. Hey, Kizzy, welcome to the African History Network show. Thanks for holding. Tell us where you're calling from.
I'm calling from Chicago.
Oh, from Chicago. I was just there yesterday. How you doing, Kizzy?
I'm all right in yourself.
I'm all right.
I just want to say, that's good. First of all, I just want to say you are doing a phenomenal job. I'm grateful to have someone like you in your voice.
Thank you.
Secondly, I would like to say I am so ecstatic that Netflix allowed this document to show, you know, to play for us, because we needed that. We needed to know. Even though a lot of us had it in our hearts and our minds from the movie Denzel Washington.
Right, Malcolm X, 1992.
Yeah, but this document was very factual, and he had step by step of everything. So I love this document. Everyone needs to watch it. It's actually, it should go to the movie. Yeah, the documentary, it should go to the movies because that's how important it is. However, the question that I have is, do you think the FBI will make a public apology for letting murderers go in the death of Malcolm X? And also,
well, let's address the first thing. I'm not looking for the FBI to make a public apology. I haven't even thought about that. I'm not looking for the FBI. I don't expect them to. I don't. So no, I hadn't even thought about them making a public apology. But okay, go ahead.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Because they was absolutely wrong. They had so many evidence and they really didn't care.
Right.
You know, even though it was many years ago, but the fact of the matter is he was a public figure for us and to us. And also, I mean, I would never go up against, you know, the Muslim family, you know, but it was very sad how they just, you know, excluded Malcolm X the way they did, because he was boisterous and he had information, and it's like what's going on now today. You know, people get upset with you when you have facts, when you're speaking righteously. You know what I mean? And it was just sad, you know, that they both turned on him, and the government played a major role as well as the Muslim family.
So one of the things I deal with that is I talk about when I deal with that is we know the FBI and the CIA were involved in this assassination, and they were involved in the exacerbating the conflict within the nation. Okay, so we have to keep that in mind. You know, I know brothers in the nation, things like that, and one of the things I look at is I wasn't there. Most of the brothers I know in the nation, they weren't there. You know, so
I mean, that's understandable, but if you look at the document, I'm not going against no one.
Right. But just 1 second.
What I'm saying is,
Kizzy, okay. just a minute. I don't want us to hold what happened 55 years ago, hold that against the nation today. I don't think that's fair to do that. Okay.
I would not do that.
No, I'm not saying you. I'm just saying in general. I'm not saying you. I'm just saying in general.
Right.
Go ahead and finish your thought.
I'm sorry, you're absolutely right. But what I was trying to state is, what happened back then with us as colors, as black, as African American, we're easy to go against each other. And it's going on right now. How can we prevent this? When can we, what can we do, like from this generation on forward, to, prevent people, like our own people, from hating what the information that we have, or being righteous, or being true, or being real? That the real issue is, had they not turned against him so quickly, the government probably wouldn't have been able to assassinate him the way they did. The question is, how and when can we stop? You know what I mean? It needs to stop.
So here's the thing. Here's a few things. I encourage people to watch the documentary Make It Plain. That's probably one of the best documentaries outside of this one on Malcolm. This one I haven't seen yet, Who Killed Malcolm X, which is on Netflix. It just debuted February 7th. Make It Plain, I've seen a number of times. It's a really, really good documentary on Malcolm. Dr. John Henry Clark is in that documentary as well. He was friends with Malcolm. And it gives more background information, because there were forces from my understanding of this, there were forces in the nation who wanted, according to Dr. John Henry Clark, and Dr. Clark knew Malcolm. There were forces in the nation who felt that if Malcolm became the leader of the nation, he would clean house. Certain people he would get out of the nation. Okay. Now I'm not saying everybody in the nation thought that. Okay, but this is how Dr. John Henry Clark explained it. And the documentary Make It Plain is on YouTube. You can watch it. But you have outsiders who are exacerbating the tensions inside of the nation. So I know, I've spoken at events with the Nation of Islam there, and we talk things like that. And one thing I explain to people, that is, most of us weren't there, and it's an unfortunate situation that took place, but people should not hold that against the nation. One, two. The other thing is when we talk about history, we have to include the Honorable Elijah Muhammad in history as well. And what I mean by that is, if because of the Nation of Islam, because of the Honorable Elijah Muhammad, we get a Malcolm X, we get a Muhammad Ali, okay? So a lot of times Elijah Muhammad, who teaches them, and yes, Dr. Clark taught Malcolm as well, that is true. Yes, Malcolm was a Garveyite when, his parents were Garveyites, so he grew up, when he was a little child, he's hearing these positive messages about black people, that's true. But if you look at page 133 of Where Do We Go From Here, Chaos of Community, which is Dr. King's last book. He wrote it in 1967, late 67. Page 133, Dr. King praises the Nation of Islam for their ability in their programs to teach our people their history, give our people dignity, take our people off of drugs, things like this, okay? And February 24th, 1966, Dr. King meets with the Honorable Elijah Muhammad. This is the year after Malcolm was assassinated. Okay? So, when we bring outside people into inside conversations, that usually doesn't turn out too well. All right, go ahead with your last statement, and then I got to go to Latrina on line 3.
Okay, and that's not a problem, but I'm glad you mentioned, because I didn't know that Martin Luther King met with Elijah Muhammad. However, that's probably what made him have the change of heart of economic inclusion. He realized that he wasn't leading his people properly as far as economic inclusion.
That's not what happened. No. Dr. King transitions from civil rights to human rights because that's the next step. People have to understand, majority of Dr. King's fight was in the South. Dr. King is trying to get Southerners in Alabama, Mississippi, Georgia. He's trying to get them to the point where African Americans are in the North before they take this thing to the next level. Okay? So it's not like all of a sudden he just realized we got to focus on economics. No, that's not what happened. No, it's just like it's just like the majority of Malcolm's fight is in the North. Majority of Malcolm's fight wasn't in the South. Majority of Malcolm's fight is in the North. With Booker T. Washington, Dr. W.B. Du Bois, the majority of Booker T. Washington's fight is in the South. Booker T. Washington is in Alabama. He's a former slave. He's dealing, even though he and Dr. W.B. Du Bois are both dealing with white supremacy, they're dealing, the way it's impacting them is different. Okay, so people really need to read Dr. King's books that he wrote. And then also read the book Martin, Malcolm in America, A Dream or a Nightmare by James H. Cone, because it deals with how toward the end of both of their lives their ideologies were convergent. And then a couple weeks ago I played excerpts of the interview that NBC News did with Dr. King May 8th, 1967, 11 months before he was assassinated. And Dr. King is involved in the Poor People's Campaign fight. So people think, like, all of a sudden Dr. King realized, we need more than civil rights and voting rights. No, that's not what happened. That's the next step. Ain't like he just realized that. No. Okay.
You have to start off with one step first. And then another question, you got to take it slow. You have to know what's important.
No, he's dealing with the reality that he's dealing with in the South.
Okay.
People don't realize in Selma, Alabama, black people are like 50% of the population, and only 1 or 2% were registered to vote, like in 1965. They're dealing with a different reality than black people were dealing with in the North.
I know you have to go. What I want to say is I'm grateful to have both of them in. I am so happy the fact that they were around and they were a positive impact on our people.
Well, not only but not only that, Malcolm joins the civil rights movement when he leaves the Nation of Islam.
Yeah.
Malcolm meets Dr. King March 26, 1964. Malcolm tells Dr. King, I'm throwing all of my effort into the heart of the civil rights movement. When Malcolm delivers his speech, The Battle of the Bullet, April 3rd, 1964, in Cleveland, Ohio, April 4th, 1964 in Detroit, he's talking about interjecting black nationalism into the civil rights movement.
Yeah. Both of the gentlemen were phenomenal men, and I'm grateful that they exist.
Right.
And that's the reason why I'm where I am, because of positive people that came before me. So I am so grateful for the both.
Right. Did you know Dr. King tried to get a concealed pistol license in 1956 after his house was firebombed during the Montgomery bus boycott?
Yeah, I heard of it. Yeah.
Yeah, because he owned guns.
Yeah.
Because he owned guns. Yeah. All right. Okay. All right. Thanks. Yeah.
So that's the positive talk. So thank you so much.
All right, sister. All right. Line 3, Latrina. Hey, Latrina, welcome to the African History Network show. Thanks for holding. Tell us where you're calling from.
Hello, I'm calling from Houston, Texas.
Houston, Texas.
Wow.
All right. Wow. I didn't know the signal went all the way down to Houston, Texas.
I was screaming and clapping as you spoke, my brother.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and it's still different today.
Mm-hmm.
I promise you. Did you ever hear about a riot going on in Houston or anywhere in Texas?
A riot?
Trayvon Martin? Nothing. We don't do that. Everything is protest in peace. Bring your candles. It doesn't matter how bad it is because we're scared.
Are you talking about protests or are you talking about riots?
Riot. I mean, just either
Or rebellions. Okay.
Yeah, rebellion. If somebody busts the window, oh my God, so everybody's getting shot.
Mm-hmm.
It's a control thing down south. Yes, racism is still very strong. Very strong. It makes some people leave when they come from, there's no God.
Mm-hmm.
But it's just outright racism. Now, about the Netflix on Malcolm, I gotta say it.
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of just like all the others. He really didn't bring us anything too special, other than the information you were talking about. This other brother, Mr. Someone, and he had 20 years.
Right. You saw the whole. You saw the whole 6 hours. I think it's 6 hours. You saw the whole 6 hours.
Parts, and I'm gonna tell you why parts. Because I felt like I was just watching the same thing over again, and this young brother, and my voice launches he was a part of that series. Amazon. I can't remember the name of the series, but he said he was talking about the last years of Malcolm's life.
Mm-hmm.
And, when he returned after everything was done, he said, and that kind of bothered me a little bit because he said at that point...
Your voice is kind of muffled. Latrina, are you on a speakerphone or something like that? Your voice is kind of muffled.
It's a headset.
Okay. Yeah, take us off the headset, please. Your voice is kind of muffled.
Now?
Yeah. You're probably talking about Roland Martin.
No, I know Roland.
Okay.
He's a younger guy.
Okay. Well, Dr. King was he suffered from depression the last year or so of his life, or a little before that, going back to
he was saying Malcolm knew that he was in a deep depression.
Mm-hmm.
That everything was coming his way.
Right.
And that he at that point, is what he said, that he needed a therapist. Now, that was
I'm not surprised.
That was a little, me either. But that was not for him to say. That's kind of, crossing bridges that you don't know about because it's no health stuff. So for him to put that out there like that,
okay.
I really thought he was wrong for that. Being that I deal with mental health problems too.
Okay.
This man picked up and he kept on doing what he needed to do. No matter what, he was depressed. He probably had visions, and it was like he probably knew that day he was going to go.
Right,
I wouldn't call that a state of depression.
Okay.
I would call that a state of he's aware. The gift of depression to know what's going on.
All right, Latrina, I gotta get this other call. Okay, thanks for calling.
Okay,
keep listening. All right, let's go to Wilson, line 3. We're coming up on the break, but let's get Wilson in. Wilson, line 3. Hey, Wilson, welcome to the African History Network show. Thanks for holding. Tell us where you're calling from.
I'm from Detroit. Good evening, brother.
Hey, how you doing, man? You all right?
I'm pretty good. You bring back a lot of old memories of me, man. I remember when Malcolm was killed, and you're absolutely right.
Yes.
The CIA and the FBI, man, exacerbated things. They were wiretapping Malcolm and Elijah.
Yep.
Along with
and Dr. King. We already know Dr. King. Yeah. Yeah. Exactly. Yep.
Yeah, I mean, they were into a lot of, I mean, led up to J. Edgar Hoover, man, that was a cynical organization.
Yep.
You know, they even planted the demise of the Panthers. They killed Mark Clark and Fred Hampton.
Right, in December, yep, and '69, yep.
So some horrible people, you know. And the CIA is nothing but trained assassins. Really. I mean, among other things, but basically that's their thing. I mean, what they did to the brother over in Iran, and put him under house arrest and later killed him. Put him in the show. I mean, just a whole host of things.
So okay, so you're talking about when in 1953 when they overthrew Mossadegh, the Prime Minister of Iran. Right.
Iran,
yeah.
Absolutely. Because what had happened is that the British had built a refinery to produce oil out of Iran.
Right.
And when he asked for the documents to look at the sales and the output and everything and found out how much they had been stealing, he then wanted to nationalize the refinery and wanted to put the British out. And Churchill and Eisenhower got together and put a worldwide boycott on him, and they arrested this guy. He was a Democratically elected guy.
Right, exactly. That was 53.
Put him under house arrest and put him in the Shaw. And later, the people ran the Shaw out. They was gonna kill him. You know.
Yeah.
I mean, so the CIA just sensitive as they can be, man. You know, but I do remember years later about Malcolm's death. His daughter, if I'm not, it's been so long. I'm going off of memory, so just bear with me. I think Malcolm had 2 daughters. I'm not certain. But the one
he had more than 2. All of it, he had, if I remember correctly, 5 children, all with daughters.
Okay. Well, with Betty, how many did he have with Betty?
That's what I'm talking about. He only had one wife.
The one I'm thinking of was had kind of red hair. I can't call it. It's been 55 years for me.
Okay.
I'm a senior hotel, so
it's all right.
Things are a little cloudy, but you bring back a lot of memories.
Right.
You know, and I do know that there was a beef between her and Farrakhan at one time. I don't. The rumor was that Farrakhan was implemented in the assassination, and there was a rumor that his daughter was thinking about putting the hit on Farrakhan at one time. And,
I don't know anything about that. Okay.
Yeah, I trust me. You hear a lot of things in the early 70s behind that, brother. Trust me.
Right.
You know, but at any rate, the good news was that all of that was later settled between the two of them, and at least doing any harm to anybody. But let me just finish with this. Elijah Muhammad had a brother here in Highland Park who had a mosque. His name was John Muhammad. Right on Hamilton and Puritan.
Okay.
Was there for years.
I think I remember that.
So, I just called in because you touched going back, man, a lot of old memories, man. Thanks for bringing it back. Enjoy your evening, brother.
Okay, Wilson, thanks for calling. All right, let's go back to this article. This is from New York Times. Who really killed Malcolm X? 55 years later, the case may be reopened. This is from February 6, 2020, updated February 7th, 2020. So, Carl Evans, author of The Judas Factor, The Plot to Kill Malcolm X, he cited film footage that shows Mr. Aziz at the Audubon Ballroom and dismissed Mr. Muhammad's research as unreliable. So that's what he's saying. I don't know whether it's true or not, but you know that's what Carl Evans is saying. Muhammad Abdul Aziz he's referring to. So David Shanies, Shanies, who along with the Innocence Project is representing Muhammad Abdul Aziz, said only that the lawyers looked forward to working cooperatively with prosecutors, quote, to see that justice is done, end quote. Their case includes FBI documents that were never shared with local police or prosecutors. Barry Scheck of the Innocence Project said that based on this evidence, quote, we are troubled that the conviction was not vacated in 1978, end quote, when Thomas Hare, filed his affidavits. If the district attorney stands by the conviction, the lawyers can move to argue it in state Supreme Court. But even if Mr. Aziz prevails, it will not settle questions about the larger forces that many think contributed to Malcolm X's death. The law enforcement agencies that spied on him but failed to protect him. The Nation of Islam leaders who called tacitly for his head. The party, that part of the story, along with volumes of unreleased FBI files, may never fully surface. Now, Zach Kondo, Kondo, author of Conspiracies, Unraveling the Assassination of Malcolm X, said, quote, "When you're dealing with a complex crime, you simplify it to 5 members of the Nation of Islam walking into a ballroom. You don't give people the context they need." He goes on to say, "A whole generation went to their graves knowing important information that people like me will never know," he said. "That's the most frustrating part." Okay, so check out this article from New York Times. That was from February 6th, updated February 7th. There was one from February 12th from abcnews.com. Malcolm X's assassination case to be reinvestigated by team that exonerated the Central Park Five. And in this article, they cite Phil Bertelsen and Rachel Dredson, co-directors and producers of Who Killed Malcolm X. They said there's been considerable doubt about the guilt of 2 of the 3 men convicted in the assassination of Malcolm X. The article goes on to talk about Manhattan District Attorney Cy Vance. So much doubt, okay, regarding the guilt of these 2 men, that the Innocence Project, a nonprofit that seeks to exonerate the wrongly convicted, met with Manhattan District Attorney Cy Vance about the case, according to Cy Vance's spokesman, Danny Frost. We're going to continue this on the other side of the break. We'll talk some about Michael Bloomberg, Donald Trump as well, and we'll deal with Godfather of Harlem has been renewed for a 2nd season. This deals with the relationship between Bumpy Johnson, Malcolm X, and Representative Adam Clayton Powell Jr. in Harlem, New York, 1963. And we'll deal with who was Adam Clayton Powell Jr. 9:10 a.m. the Superstation of Future Radio on Michael Imhotep, the African History Network show. We'll be back in a few minutes. All right, everybody, let's see. We got Dale, Barbara, Sean, Anita. Yeah, everybody share this broadcast on your Facebook page. And then my 15 DVD bundle pack, Black History Month bundle pack, is available right now at AfricanHistoryNetwork.com.
3, 2, 1.
Welcome back to the African History Network show right here on 9:10 a.m. Superstation. WFDF. Hey, I'm your host, Brother Michael Imhotep. It is Sunday, February 16th. February 16th, 2020. And we are live tonight, everybody. So we're broadcasting on our Facebook fan page, The African History Network, 9:10 a.m. Superstation. Their Facebook fan page is down. You know, we always broadcast on our fan page. Follow us at The African History Network, The African History Network on Facebook. Call-in number is area code 313-778-7600. 313-778-7600 is the call-in number if you have a question or comment. All right. If you like this type of information, also you can donate to the African History Network through Cash App, $ the AHN Show. Through Cash App, $ the AHN Show. Through Cash App to help support the African History Network. And then also PayPal, paypal.me/the AHN Show, or at our website, AfricanHistoryNetwork.com. AfricanHistoryNetwork.com. Click on the yellow donate button. You can donate there. And my DVD lectures are at our website as well. We have our 15 DVD bundle pack, our Black History Month bundle pack. And it includes 15 of my presentations and an additional one dealing with the history of African American History Month, Black History Month, Dr. Carter G. Woodson, etc. So that's right on the homepage of our website, AfricanHistoryNetwork.com. Okay, call-in number is 313-778-7600. 313-778-7600 is the call-in number if you have a question or comment. Right before the break, we were continuing our discussion about the Netflix documentary entitled Who Killed Malcolm X. ABCnews.com has an article from February 12th, Malcolm X's assassination case to be re-investigated by team that exonerated Central Park Five. So the Innocence Project, a non-profit organization that seeks to exonerate the wrongly convicted, met with Manhattan District Attorney Cy Vance about reopening the case dealing with Malcolm X's assassination. And this is according to a spokesman for District Attorney Cy Vance named Danny Frost. Spokesman Danny Frost said, quote, "He has determined that the District Attorney's Office will begin a preliminary review of the matter, which will inform the office regarding what further investigative steps may be undertaken," end quote. Now, Danny Frost, spokesman for Manhattan District Attorney Cy Vance, confirmed that senior trial counsel Peter Casolaro, who was part of the team that reinvestigated and dismissed the charges against the Central Park 5 case in 2002, also will assist with the Malcolm X case. The co-directors of the documentary Who Killed Malcolm X, Phil Bertelsen and Rachel Dretson, cited several reasons for re-examining Malcolm X's assassination. Quote, the primary reason is that the only assassin, Thomas Hagen, caught at the scene and carrying a weapon, said that the other two men, Thomas Johnson and Norman Butler, were innocent, were innocent at the trial. He said this at the trial. They were innocent. They responded by email. They went on to say, quote, 10 years later, when attorney William Kunstler attempted to reopen the case, Thomas Hagen maintained the innocence of Johnson and Butler and named the men he said were the real accomplices in a sworn affidavit. So you can check out the rest of this article also from abcnews.go.com, abcnews.go.com, which is the official website of ABC News. All right, let's go back to the phone lines. We have a call here, line 1. Let's go to Steve, line 1. Steve, thanks for holding. Welcome to the African History Network show. Tell us where you're calling from.
Hey, Mike, this is Steve from Northwest Detroit.
Hey, Steve, Northwest Detroit. Thanks for calling.
I got a few questions. All right, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
I got a few questions I've been wanting to ask you for a long time, and I finally,
go ahead.
got you.
Okay.
I want to know, what is the best documentary for Robert F. Williams?
Mm-hmm.
I want to know if you ever think we'll ever, as a black people, have another Robert F. Williams, Negroes with Guns, Secrets of Defense. Mm-hmm. I want to know if you ever had a show, or you're going to talk about the book by Bowers, Spies in Mississippi.
Spies in Mississippi. Okay, let's take these one by one because you're throwing a lot of this. Okay, so there's a documentary, Negroes with Guns. Now, I've read about Robert F. Williams. I went on YouTube trying to see the documentary, and it was blocked or something. I couldn't watch the documentary.
Yeah,
Negroes with Guns.
I've been doing all my investigation is through YouTube, and it's nothing out there. There's
Right.
a lot of things out there, but not a whole document.
Right.
Clips.
So there's some articles dealing with Robert F. Williams. I've read some articles. There was, let me see if I can pull up something. But Robert F. Williams was the president of the Monroe County NAACP in North Carolina, and he advocated African Americans arm themselves to protect themselves against the Klan, white supremacists, things like this. So he was in the civil rights movement, and he was also advocating for us to arm ourselves. And you'll hear about Robert F. Williams and the Black Guard. The Black Guard.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
And with the Black Guard, articles I read about them, when the Klan would come through their community, driving through their community, things like this, a lot of African Americans were running their houses, pull the shades down. The Black Guard would go in their house, get their guns, come out, and they would stand up in the line and stand out there with their guns and stare the Klan down, and the Klan just kept going. And he and his wife ended up having to go to Cuba. They fled to Cuba.
Yeah. Like most of our leaders had to be in exile.
Mm-hmm.
And I want people, the brothers and sisters, to understand that he was a peaceful man, and
Right.
he was, but until he saw a pregnant woman being thrown downstairs, a black woman, by the police, that's when he said enough is enough.
Right.
And that's when he picked up the gun.
Mm-hmm.
And ever since then, and then after that, they started plotting against, when I say they, the government started plotting against him and ended up in exile. My next question I have for you was, first of all, I'm going to say, my hero.
Yeah, well, just 1 second. You asked if there's going to be another Robert F. Williams. It's important to understand. I dealt with this a couple of weeks ago. Well, actually 2 weeks in a row when we were commemorating Dr. King Day. If it had not been for Negroes with Guns, there would not have been a civil rights movement.
Absolutely.
So I talked about the book by Professor Charles E. Cobb Jr. This nonviolent stuff that gets you killed. How guns made the civil rights movement possible. I ordered that book and I'm reading it now. It's at home. But people should Google his name, Professor Charles E. Cobb Jr.
He has a lecture on YouTube.
Yeah.
He has a lecture on YouTube.
Professor Charles E. Cobb Jr. Okay, he was a field secretary for SNCC, Student Violent Non-Coordinating Committee, for 5 years in rural Mississippi, and he was organizing African Americans to register to vote and to get the right to vote, etc. And he talked about how when the civil rights workers first got down to the South, when they came from the North and went down South, he said black people down South said, we know that you're nonviolent, but we're not. And we're not going to let these white people kill you. And he talked about how it was African Americans with guns who were protecting the civil rights workers. He said they never stayed at somebody's home who didn't own a gun, have a gun over the fireplace or on a nightstand and things like this. Because when you grow up in the South, you grow up in a gun culture. And when you, he talks about Fannie Lou Hamer, things like this. There have been a number of articles written. One of them is from Washington Post, from Professor Nicholas Johnson. And Professor Nicholas Johnson wrote the book Negroes and the Gun. And this article is Nonviolent Winchesters and the Fine Art of Concealed Carry in the Modern Civil Rights Movement. Because when you actually study the civil rights movement, you read that Medgar Evers owned guns, Fannie Lou Hamer owned guns, Dr. King owned guns until Big Al Rustin convinced him to get rid of his guns. Rosa Parks' husband, Raymond Parks, owned guns. Things like this. And you find out, well, guns played a role in the civil rights movement. They just weren't just out openly walking around with their guns. But the Deacons for Defense of Justice were. But the guns played a role in the civil rights movement. Go ahead.
Just like they always say, there was no slavery revolts. There were plenty of slavery revolts, and there were plenty of Negroes with guns.
Right.
And another thing I wanted to point out is, I look at what people say and do, and then I compare it to our history.
Yeah.
And one of the things that bothers me in the city of Detroit, we have this political group called the Fannie Lou Hamer. They do nothing compared to what Fannie Lou Hamer stood for, stood on. So I get tired of them patronizing or using images of our ancestors who were vigilant fighters for our people, but then they use that name and they come forward to today and they do nothing for our people. Fannie Lou, if anybody want to Google her, she was strong. And she didn't play.
Down in Mississippi.
People today use that name, and they got Stockholm syndrome. I believe that group. So I don't like this. And then another thing last thing I want to say is, okay, I love Malcolm X. Period.
Yes.
And I read Manny Marable. Mike, I never despised buying books, but the one book that I ever despised buying was Manny Marable's book, because he tried to make Malcolm into a homosexual.
Right. I heard a lot of negative things about that book. Yeah, I heard a lot of negative things about that book.
And it's funny that he died on the night that his book was supposed to be released, so I'll just leave that there.
Right, I remember that.
And the Judas Factor, I read that book. And Make It Plain is one of my favorite documentaries.
Right.
But now I'm going to say this. This Who Killed Malcolm X is absolutely brilliant. Because, I mean, out of all the people in that docu-series, that white police officer from New York, Bruiser, that man had no reason to lie. He had no reason to lie. And Talmadge Hire himself had no reason to lie.
Right.
And for him to connect it to, and for people, see, you can't use the Negro version of today and try to blame the Nation of Islam for what may have transpired back in 65. Because the FBI had the perfect storm. They had the rift between Malcolm and Elijah, and so that what they do is just add the gas to the match. You understand? So they were just pawns. The Nation of Islam was pawns. Just like they used the pawns to kill the Panthers. They used pawns to kill all of our black leaders. So I would not dare blame the Nation of Islam today for what happened in 65, because it was just being used by J. Edgar Hoover. You know, so I'm saying that everyone should watch that docu-series because it's actually good. And I'm going to tell you the one quote from Malcolm that I had not heard, and I thought I heard everything, was, and it applies to today's young black men and women that's out here and think they can't reinvent themselves. He said, it is not a disgrace to be a criminal. But it is a disgrace if you remain a criminal.
Right.
I love that.
Right.
I love that because it shows our brothers and sisters you can make mistakes in life and you can have redemption. You can reinvent yourself. You can have a true resurrection. So
Right.
I want people to watch what Malcolm stood for. And, you know, sometimes, Mike, when you bring up a teacher can bring up a pupil. And the teacher puts so much into a pupil that pupil turns out to be better than the teacher. I think Elijah Muhammad poured so much into Malcolm, and Malcolm believed 100% of this man and became better than Elijah. And I think that's just where the hatred came from Malcolm, from the nation at that point in time, is that the pupil became the teacher. That's all I have to say on that. And
Okay.
I appreciate you, and I appreciate you dropping the knowledge, and I appreciate you waking up our people.
All right, John. Steve. All right, Steve. Thanks for calling. All right. Now, the last part, I don't know about that. That's outside the circumference of my awareness. I don't know. Okay, so check out those 2 articles. For next week's show, I'm going to watch the documentary series, Who Killed Malcolm X. I'm going to reach out to Professor James Small, get him on the show as well so we can talk about this some more. And, this ties into the series Godfather of Harlem as well, which we're going to talk about here in a few minutes. Let's go to John, line 28. John, welcome to the African History Network show. Thanks for holding. Tell us where you're calling from, John.
I'm calling from the east side of Detroit, okay? Thank you very much for taking my call. And I'll tell you exactly right. When I don't know you for me, when they bombed Dr. King's home,
Oh, absolutely.
it was a bunch of African American guys risking to went over there with their people. And,
Yeah.
Dr. King told to go back and stay there until I come.
Right. So that was January 30th, 1956. So so Dr. King's house was bombed twice that I know of in 1956. Yeah. January 1956 and September 1956. And go ahead.
He spoke about it and he said they went in the war, go out something and so forth. But he told me go back and stay there until I come. I'll be over there. I come coming there. I'll just stay there and wait on me and so forth. Cause he won't want to have nobody to dictate where he at, where he live, and
he didn't want a riot to break out because this was during this was during the Montgomery bus boycott, and he did not want a riot to break out and to derail the Montgomery bus boycott. Okay,
that's right. That's right. Well,
go ahead.
Put it in perspective. That's exactly right. And so I just want to say that, I just want to thank the knowledge that you've given out and so forth. And I don't know, that lady was kind of confused when she was talking to you and so forth. But
all right.
I guess that I was supposed to get a little confused and so forth. But thank you, Hotep. Thank you, and keep up the good work. And keeping knowledge coming and so forth.
All right, John. All right, John.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks for calling. All right, I don't want to talk about another caller being confused or sounding confused. Okay, but I understand your sentiments, John. Okay, I did a broadcast. I did a Facebook Live video. I guess it was early February, late January, something. I don't remember. It all running together. But I dealt with when Dr. King's house was firebombed. Read the so that's on YouTube. Go watch that, because I go deep into this. That was January 30th, 1956. Also, EJI.org, the Equal Justice Initiative. If you follow me on Facebook, you know that pretty much each day I share their calendar entries dealing with this date in African American history. They have one from January 30th, 1956, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s home bombed in Montgomery, Alabama. And on the evening of January 30th, 1956, 1 month after the beginning of the Montgomery bus boycott, the Montgomery, Alabama home of Dr. King was bombed while his wife Coretta, 7-week-old daughter Yolanda, and a neighbor were inside. The front of the home was damaged, but no one was injured. Dr. King was speaking at a large meeting when he learned about the bombing. He rushed home to find a large crowd gathered outside of his home, some carrying weapons, and prepared to take action in his defense. The crowd cheered Dr. King's arrival, and the mayor and police commissioner urged the crowd to remain calm and promised the bombing would be fully investigated. So you have to understand, Mayor William A. Gale was the mayor of Montgomery, Alabama at this time. So the mayor, okay, and the police commissioner are there. So you got a crowd of African Americans with weapons, and they're really ready to go after the people who bombed Dr. King's house. This is the second month of the Montgomery bus boycott, which started December 5th, 1955. Okay, so Dr. King ain't gonna tell them, yeah, with the mayor and the police commissioner there, yeah, go ahead and take care of these people. He ain't gonna do that. He wants them to go home. He doesn't want a riot to break out and derail the Montgomery bus boycott. Dr. King confirmed his family was safe and then addressed the anxious and angry crowd, many of whom were members of his church, because church people carry guns too. He advocated for nonviolence. He said, quote, if you have weapons, take them home. If you do not have them, please do not seek them. We cannot solve this problem through violence. We must meet violence with nonviolence. Okay? End quote. So the crowd dispersed peacefully after Dr. King assured them, quote, go home and don't worry. We are not hurt. And remember, if anything happens to me, there will be others to take my place. But the mayor and the police chief are there. There was a reason why most slaves ran away at nighttime and not in the daytime. There's a strategy. Go read this, eji.org. Okay, we're coming up on a break. When we come back, we'll go to Theo, line 1. The call-in number, area code 313-778-7600. You listen to the African History Network show. And we'll also talk about Godfather of Harlem on Epics, the series that deals with the relationship in 1963 between Bumpy Johnson, gangster Bumpy Johnson, Adam Clayton Powell Jr., and Malcolm X. It's been renewed for a second season. It's a fantastic series. Watch it on Epics. We'll talk about this on the other side of the break. 9:10 a.m. the Superstation, WFDF, the African History Network show. I'm Michael Imhotep. We'll be back in a few minutes. Welcome back to the African History Network show right here on 9:10 a.m. the Superstation, WFDF. Hey, I'm your host, Brother Michael Imhotep. It is Sunday, February 16th, 2020. We're halfway through African American History Month. If you want me to do a presentation for your group or organization, if you want me to speak for African American History Month or anything else, email me at customerservice@africanhistorynetwork.com, customerservice@africanhistorynetwork.com. Also, you can give us a call, area code 313-462-0003, 313-462-0003. I can respond faster by email. I spoke at St. Francis Missionary Baptist Church today, so thanks to Pastor Cheeks and Deacon McConicle. And people really learned a lot. This year's theme for African American History Month is African Americans and the Vote. African Americans and the Vote. Thanks also to those that came out last Saturday to Nanny's Knowledge Cafe. It was at February 8th. All my days are running together. February 8th, Nanny's Knowledge Cafe. Over there on 71 Oakman Avenue. If you want the presentation that I did at Nanny's Knowledge Cafe, we'll have that available on DVD and digital download this week. I'm going through the editing process. It's a deep presentation. We deal with the Enforcement Acts of 1870 to 1875, the Ku Klux Klan Act of 1871. We deal with how the U.S. Constitution does not explicitly give the right to vote. We talk about this year's annual theme for African American History Month, African Americans and the Votes. A lot of content that I covered, as well as some of the history of Dr. Carter G. Woodson and the origins of African American History Month. All right. Let's go back to the phone lines. We were talking about who killed Malcolm X right before the break, and then after we go to Theo on line 1, we're going to talk about Godfather of Harlem is renewed for season 2, and we'll deal with who was Adam Clayton Powell Jr. Welcome to the African History Network show. Theo, tell us where you call it from.
From Detroit.
All right. Is this Theo Broughton?
Yes, it is.
All right, how you doing, Miss Theo Broughton of Hood Research?
Yeah.
Yep.
You gotta follow us on Twitter. Listen, I just want
Look how she just snuck that in. Okay,
Oh, no.
follow them on Twitter. Okay.
Wait a minute. I'm not like that other guy who called. He's always sticking his in. But anyway,
Go ahead.
I wanted to say I enjoy your show all the time.
Oh, thank you.
And the presentations that you have done for the research as well.
Yes.
And the question that I have has to do with the Central Park Five. You mentioned them a few times.
Mm-hmm.
Can you tell me what years did that happen and who was the mayor during that time?
Central Park, I think, wasn't that 89 when the Central Park 5 happened? Bloomberg wasn't the mayor. I think it was Rudy Giuliani, if I remember correctly.
Giuliani, okay.
Yeah.
I knew it wasn't Bloomberg, but I didn't know.
Yeah, Donald Trump's friend. You know, his friend is going back and forth to Ukraine.
Oh,
Yeah, 1989. Yeah, 1989. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
That great American, Rudy Giuliani.
Oh, Lord help us. With all these great Americans. And you know, 45 says, Make America Great Again.
Mm-hmm.
There was a series that came on with Della Reese.
Yeah.
Oh, geez. It was on, I think it was on for about 6 or 7 years.
Mm-hmm.
And there is an episode.
Oh, Touched by an Angel?
Yes, that's it. There is an episode in that series
Mm-hmm.
where these skinheads and Klan members and all were carrying signs that said, Make America Great Again. And you know,
Mm-hmm.
that was in the 80s.
Well, that was a slogan that came from Ronald Reagan back in about 1980.
Ah.
That originally came from Ronald Reagan. That originally came from Ronald Reagan, Make America Great Again,
Oh,
and Trump adopted that.
Yeah.
Just like running on the platform of Law and Order back in 2016. That came from Richard Nixon. When Richard Nixon ran in 1968, Richard Nixon ran on the platform of Law and Order.
Mm-hmm. Well, you know, people have to remember he is a producer of entertainment. He is a promoter. He had what was the Apprentice, and then the beauty pageant, and whatever else.
Mm-hmm.
And that State of the Union address was just another entertaining promotion. Because right now he's trying to appeal every way he can to the black community, bump up his vote.
Well, yeah. What's happening is he. I dealt with this, I think it was last week, how he used African Americans as political props at the State of the Union address. So News1.com has a really good article dealing with that. And then also I dealt with the fact checking from the Washington Post that and New York Times that dealt with the fact checking. You can go to WashingtonPost.com and search for a fact check of State of the Union address. And then the New York Times, theirs is entitled Fact Checking Trump's 2020 State of the Union Address and the Democratic Response. So, yeah, when you really deal with the facts, all this stuff just starts crumbling apart.
Yes, and I certainly hope that our people are paying attention.
Yeah.
That little girl, talk about putting her in the best school. She was already in the best school.
Yeah, she was already in a charter school. Yeah, she enrolled in September.
All of the schools.
Right, exactly. He referred to them as government schools, right?
Yeah.
But charter schools are also charter schools are public schools. They're just a different type of public school. So this is a shell game. He's a con man. This is what people don't understand. A lot of people don't understand this. He's a con man.
Right.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Thanks for calling.
you.
Yeah, no problem. All right. Read Washington Post, they're fact checking from February 4th, 2020. Fact checking President Trump's 2020 State of the Union address at WashingtonPost.com. Read that also. And then the article that, being that Theo brought this up, we were going to talk about this later in the show, but we run out of time, so we may do this next week. Or I may do a Facebook Live broadcast later in the week. I talked about the article last week, to many black voters, Trump's outreach is more showmanship than substance. More showmanship than substance. This is from Janelle Ross, NBCNews.com, February 6, 2020. And she has an error here in the article. I'm not sure if she fixed it. I sent her a message on Twitter. In the article, when it refers to Alice Marie Johnson, on page 5 of the article, and Alice Marie Johnson, the African-American woman who was freed with the help of Kim Kardashian and many others. She was featured in this Super Bowl ad that the Trump campaign ran. It said, on Sunday, the Trump Super Bowl ad featured Alice Marie Johnson, a black woman who served 21 years of a life sentence before Trump commuted her punishment in June 2018. Alice Marie Johnson had been convicted of conspiracy to possess cocaine and attempted possession of cocaine. She came to Trump's attention as a result of a celebrity-studded public lobbying campaign. Johnson was freed as a result of Trump's signing the First Step Act, one of several criminal justice policies in the last decade that have led to reduced prison terms for thousands of people. That's inaccurate. Alice Marie Johnson was not freed because of the First Step Act, because Donald Trump did not sign the First Step Act until December 2018. Alice Marie Johnson was freed in June 2018. The First Step Act was not signed by Trump until December 2018. That's inaccurate. So I sent her a tweet to ask her to please correct that in her article. I'm not calling her out. What happened was, because I shared this on the air, I wanted to let you all know about that, okay? Just because I do research, so this is how I picked up on that. All right. Okay, let's go to Godfather of Harlem. Right? So ShadowandAct.com has a really good article. Godfather of Harlem renewed for season 2 at Epic. So it stars Forrest Whitaker portraying Bumpy Johnson. Many people learned about Bumpy Johnson in the movie Hoodlum, starring Lawrence Fishburne as Bumpy Johnson and co-starring Vanessa Williams. Godfather of Harlem has received a second season renewal at Epix, EPIX. The news was announced this past Wednesday. The series is led by Forrest Whitaker as legendary mob boss Bumpy Johnson. Godfather of Harlem is produced by ABC Signature Studios and had a first season order of 10 episodes. It is written by Narcos co-creator Chris Brancato, Brancato, and Paul Eckstein, or Eckstein. Quote, Godfather of Harlem Season 1 was a remarkable success, tripling previous viewership numbers for the network and earning acclaim from both critics and viewers alike. We could not wait to reunite with Chris, Paul, Forrest, and the team at ABC Signature to continue telling this compelling and extremely relevant story, end quote, said Epic's president Michael Wright, W-R-I-G-H-T, in a statement. Okay, Vincent D'Onofrio, who plays Vincent the Gianganti, Giancarlo Esposito, who portrays Adam Clayton Powell Jr., Ilfenesh Hadera, Marquand Smith, Kelvin Harrison, Paul Sorvino, and Nigel Thatch. Nigel Thatch plays Malcolm X. He does an excellent job playing Malcolm X. The official description, Godfather of Harlem, is inspired. So the official description of this series is Godfather of Harlem is inspired by the story of infamous crime boss Bumpy Johnson, portrayed by Forrest Whitaker, who in the early 1960s returned from 10 years in prison to find the neighborhood he once ruled in shambles. Okay, he returns back to Harlem. With the streets controlled by the Italian mob, Bumpy must take on the Genovese crime family to regain control. During the brutal battle, he forms an alliance with radical preacher Malcolm X, portrayed by Nigel Thatch. Catching Malcolm's political rise in the crosshairs of social upheaval and a mob war that threatens to tear the city apart. Godfather of Harlem is a collision of the criminal underworld and the civil rights movement during one of the most tumultuous times in American history. Okay, so check out this article from shadowindact.com. Now, at the beginning of each episode, it tells you that even though these are historic figures, these are fictional situations, many of them, fictional conversations, etc. Okay? At least they tell you that at the beginning. I think they should have a voiceover announcer who actually says it, but at least that is at the beginning of each episode. But it's a phenomenal series. It causes you to do a lot of research. Okay? On YouTube, there's a documentary on Adam Clayton Powell Jr. And when you look at the comments on the documentary, a lot of people are saying that I found this documentary because I started researching Adam Clayton Powell Jr. because of the series Godfather of Harlem. Okay, so check that out. It's a lot of the series is a lot of the documentaries in black and white. FaceToFaceAfrica.com had a really good article from January 30th, 2020. Adam Clayton Powell Jr., first African-American congressman of New York who fought to create jobs for blacks. Adam Clayton Powell Jr., first African-American congressman of New York who fought to create jobs for blacks. If you watch the documentary, A Great and Mighty Walk, about Dr. John Henrik Clark, Dr. Clark talks about Adam Clayton Powell Jr. in the documentary, and he praises Adam Clayton Powell Jr. He talks about how he got the job done, etc. Adam Clayton Powell Jr. was a civil rights activist, preacher, and politician. He was the first person of African American descent to be elected from New York to Congress. Adam Clayton Powell Jr. became a prominent leader in fighting for employment rights and fair housing for African Americans in New York City. In his own summation of his congressional career, he stated, quote, "As a member of Congress, I have done nothing more than any other member, and by the grace of God, I intend to do not one bit less," end quote. Now, according to a 1996 New York Times publication, one of Adam Clayton Powell Jr.'s few close associates observed him as follows, quote, "The man had a rare combination of sheer brilliance on the one hand and childlike naivete on the other. He even wanted, if he ever wanted something very badly, he could convince himself that he should have it and convince everybody else around him too," end quote. Now, it's important to know, because of the series, I started doing more research on Bumpy Johnson as well. Bumpy provided security for Malcolm X when Malcolm leads the Nation of Islam. A lot of people don't know this. Bumpy provided security for Malcolm X when Malcolm leads the Nation of Islam. And Malcolm X called off the security about 3 weeks before he was assassinated. Okay. I'm going to get Professor James Small here on the show because I talked to Professor Small about 2 months ago. I called him one night, and because Professor Small is a consultant on this series, Godfather of Harlem, because he knew Bumpy Johnson. He met Malcolm X once. He was the personal bodyguard for Malcolm's sister Ella for 18 years. And I had a long conversation. There's some stuff I can't even talk about on the air that he told me. He told me stuff. He told me about Nicky Barnes there in Harlem, Bumpy Johnson in Harlem, a whole bunch of stories, man. He was breaking down. So I got to get him on because there's some stuff I can't even repeat. All right. But there was, in doing research because of this series, dailymail.co.uk has a good article, "The Real Godfather of Harlem, How Bumpy Johnson Went from Enforcer Who Fought the Mob to the chess-playing Robin Hood like Kingpin who ran the neighborhood for decades," okay? And so check out this article from dailymail.co.uk. It's Bumpy Elmsworth Johnson was born in South Carolina in 1905 or 1906. His parents, fearful that his brother Willie might be lynched, sent him to New York City. Bumpy followed a few years later, and he later fell in with William Bub Hewlett. By the 1930s, Bumpy Johnson was working as enforcer for Stephanie St. Clair, who was fighting mobster Dutch Schultz over control of her street lottery operations. Okay, so we saw that portrayed in the movie Hoodlum, all right? So Hoodlum dealt with the 1930s Harlem. The Godfather of Harlem deals with the 1963. Okay. Stephanie St. Clair kept control of her racket, which she then handed over to Bumpy Johnson, who was then working as a middleman between the mob and community. Bumpy Johnson, who also served time in prison, ran Harlem from the 1930s to the 1960s. He was also known for his chess playing, his poetry, and generosity. And then it started talking about the show Godfather of Harlem, because when you watch this series, man, everybody's coming to Bumpy Johnson for help. Whether they're politicians, whether they're church people, whether they're criminals, everybody's coming to Bumpy Johnson for help. So yeah, check that out. Let's go back to Adam Clayton Powell. All right. So the publication described, so this article from the New York Times from 1996 described Adam Clayton Powell Jr. as the leader of the largest congregation in the nation at the time, a political demagogue, a congressional rebel, a civil rights leader 3 decades before the Montgomery bus boycott, a wheeler dealer, a rabble-rouser, a grandstander, a fugitive, a playboy, and a most effective chairman of the House Committee on Education and Labor, despite a high absentee rate in Congress, okay, according to the article from the New York Times, 1996. So Adam Clayton Powell Jr. was born November 29, 1908 in New Haven to Mattie Fletcher Powell and the Reverend Adam Clayton Powell Sr., who later moved to New York, where he was made pastor of the Abyssinian Baptist Church. The church was then on 40th Street, between 7th and 8th Avenues, okay? And I've been to Harlem a few times. I've been to the Black Arts Theater in Harlem. I've spoken there. And when I first went to Harlem, I had to go to 125th and Lenox in Harlem, because that was the name of an album from one of my heroes, Gil Scott-Heron, 125th and Lenox. So I had to go to 125th and Lenox. So Adam Clayton Powell Jr. would slip out of his father's church meetings to attend sessions of Marcus Garvey's African Nationalist Pioneer Movement, the UNIA, Universal Negro Improvement Association, when he was only 15 years old. Young Adam Clayton Powell Jr. took a bachelor's degree. He got a bachelor's degree at Colgate University in 1930 and a master's degree at Columbia University the following year, 1931. An honorary doctorate of divinity degree was also conferred on him by Shaw University for relief work in Harlem, New York. He also held a LLD from Virginia Union University. Now, Adam Clayton Powell Jr. became the chairman of the Coordinating Committee for Employment, and he pressured local businesses to hire African Americans on all levels of employment. During the Depression, Powell led a series of demonstrations in Harlem, New York against major businesses, department stores, bus lines, the telephone company, Harlem Hospital, and others, forcing them and other businesses, forcing them to hire African Americans. If you watch the third installment of Eyes on the Prize, third installment of Eyes on the Prize, which is entitled, that's 1960 to 1961, Ain't Scared of Your Jails. They talk about the 1960 Easter boycott of the downtown business district in Nashville, Tennessee. It's a very, very powerful segment that they deal with. And African Americans were trying to break the back of segregation in Nashville, Tennessee, so they have this massive economic boycott of the downtown business district. And they're boycotting the Woolworths and the Kresge's and some of these chain stores. And then African Americans up north start boycotting the same chain stores up north that their brothers and sisters are boycotting down south, even though they can get full service up north. So these boycotts are going to spread to 59 cities, according to Eyes on the Prize. There's a press conference that takes place. Adam Clayton Powell Jr. is calling for Americans across America, not just African Americans, Americans who believe in freedom, believe in justice, to participate in these boycotts also, all across the country. Now, Representative Adam Clayton Powell Jr. led a shop only where you can work boycott. Shop only where you can work boycott of the entire store along 125th Street, shutting most of the businesses down, thereby forcing them to hire African Americans. Because you're going to see this. Don't spend your money where you can't work. Don't spend your money where you can't work. Now, contrary to popular belief, I know people like to romanticize segregation. I don't know where the hell they get this stuff from. Okay? Yes, you had some African American communities where we had more businesses and had everything that we needed. That wasn't all African American communities, though. Because when you go study the 1957 Tuskegee, Alabama economic boycott that lasted 4 years and led to the lawsuit of Gomillion versus Lightfoot, the U.S. Supreme Court case of Gomillion versus Lightfoot, those African Americans in Tuskegee, Alabama, they went back and forth to Montgomery, Alabama. It was about an 80-mile round trip. They went back and forth to Montgomery, Alabama, to support the businesses in Montgomery and boycott the businesses in Tuskegee. Because obviously they didn't have everything that they needed there. I know we like to romanticize segregation. Okay? But no, when you go study this in Harlem, even when you watch Godfather of Harlem, right? Yeah, we had some African American owned businesses, but we didn't have everything that we needed. Okay, I know we just like to have a lot. Now, some communities did, but even with Black Wall Street, when you study Black Wall Street in Tulsa, Oklahoma, you do realize some of those people in Black Wall Street were poor. Some of them were domestics working for white people in South Tulsa. African Americans lived in North Tulsa. You know, I know we like to have this revisionist history and just act like segregation was paradise. But no, don't. Did you have some communities that were better off than others and own more businesses than others? Yeah, that's true. But a lot of this wasn't like exactly what it's cracked up to be. So Representative Adam Clayton Powell Jr. led a shop only where you can work boycott of the entire store, of the stores along 125th Street, shutting most of the businesses down, thereby forcing them to hire African American workers. In 1941, he led the bus boycott of the New York Transit Authority that led to 200 jobs for African American constituents. Now, this is 1941. This is before the Montgomery bus boycott, which starts December 5th, 1955. Before the Montgomery bus boycott, there was the Baton Rouge, Louisiana bus boycott in 1953, led by the Reverend T.J. Jemison. That boycott lasted 8 days. Cost the bus company $1,600 a day. That served as a template for the Montgomery bus boycott. So Dr. King and E.D. Nixon and others are calling the Reverend T.J. Jemison to get advice from him on how to operate their bus boycott. This is where they get the idea of the 300-car dispatch service that they institute. Okay? So what we have to understand is that even in what we may perceive as a failure at that time, there's still success in the failure, because if they did not have the Baton Rouge, Louisiana bus boycott in 1953, they wouldn't have that template to learn from to have a successful bus boycott in 1955. And then we know the Brown versus Board of Education U.S. Supreme Court case of May 1954, this let them know that we can go to the U.S. Supreme Court and get some type of justice. Because what ended the Montgomery bus boycott was not what ended the Montgomery bus boycott. What ended segregation on the buses, I should say. What ended segregation on the buses in Montgomery, Alabama, was not the bus boycott. It was the lawsuit of Browder versus Gale, filed February 1st, 1956, by attorney Fred Gray, which goes to the U.S. Supreme Court. And the U.S. Supreme Court rules that segregation on the buses in Montgomery, Alabama was unconstitutional. But that comes after Brown versus Board of Education, because E.D. Nixon and others and attorney Fred Gray felt that because of that ruling from the U.S. Supreme Court in 54, that segregation on the buses was unconstitutional. So they wanted to test that. So yes, the economic bus boycott was powerful and it was needed. But that's not what ended segregation on the buses. It was that lawsuit. So a lot of people may look at the 1953 Baton Rouge, Louisiana bus boycott and say, oh, it wasn't successful. Well, maybe in 53, but in 53, they don't know Brown versus Board of Education is going to happen in 54, and that Supreme Court ruling is going to come down that changes things. They don't know there's going to be a bus boycott in 55. It's just like the Albany, Georgia movement of 1960 and 61, which is looked at as a failure. But then that sets up the Birmingham campaign of 63. So when Reverend Fred Shuttlesworth calls Dr. King and says, if you come to Birmingham, Alabama and help us with this boycott in Birmingham, Alabama, in the fight to break the back of segregation, I can guarantee you a victory. They learned from the Albany movement that your focus, your focus on segregation has to be specific. They learned from the mistakes from the Albany movement and didn't make those same mistakes in the Birmingham campaign. So the Birmingham campaign was successful where the Albany movement was not. So even in the failures, there's still a lesson to learn, and that sets up a victory. So in 1941, Reverend Adam Clayton Powell Jr. led a bus boycott of the New York Transit Authority that led to 200 jobs for African American constituents. Powell ran for the city, for the New York City Council, with the third highest number of voters ever casting for a candidate in city elections, and was elected in 1941, becoming the first African American to serve on the New York City Council. He has an aura and charisma that made his supporters love him. He had an eloquence that could be traced to his father, and reportedly he made African Americans feel important. Okay, check out the rest of this article because we run out of time. I want to go to clip 2, JT from AM Joy dealing with Mayor Bloomberg. Check out this article. Adam Powell Jr., first African American congressman of New York who fought to create jobs for blacks. So AM Joy, Joanne Reed, AM MSNBC, she talked about Mayor Bloomberg this weekend, and she had one of the representatives from his campaign. Let's go to this clip.
Are looking for solutions to things like affordable health care, access to high quality public education, better jobs that are authentic avenues to the middle class. We are talking to voters about that. They're responding to that first and foremost. Secondarily, I don't think Mike is just getting traction because of money. This is now probably an 8-week trope at this. Mike Bloomberg is rising solely because he's spending a lot of money. If that was true, Tom Steyer wouldn't be stuck at 1 or 2%. Mike Bloomberg has gotten traction because he's got great bona fides. He's made huge mistakes. We are not denying that. But net, Mike Bloomberg has more governing experience than anybody else running. He's solved more of the problems that voters care about right now. And he has a very inclusive vision that isn't just a promise. It's something he's delivered on, mistakes along the way, for decades. And it's interesting, for example, on the issue of women. Bloomberg Philanthropies is run by women. It focuses on women's issues. Patty Harris, who ran Bloomberg Philanthropies, is now Mike's senior advisor, probably his most trusted advisor. She's the campaign chairwoman. I'm the senior advisor on the campaign. She was his deputy mayor in City Hall. Mike has always relied on women for guidance and advice. Those aren't the actions of someone who's a sexist. Sure.
I have a woman on the set here that I want to ask Ola, because I have seen anecdotally, even a lot of black women buying into the idea of Mike Bloomberg. I don't know what you're seeing in your friends, those you're talking with, whether in the disabled community or just among black women. Do you see it, and can you explain it?
The intersection of race and gender is very important, and amongst my group of disabled women friends, disabled black women, we see right through Bloomberg. Particularly, one of the greatest concerns of black women in general, regardless of ability or not, is mass incarceration. His stop and frisk policy affects disabled black people. You know why? 40% of the prison system is full of disabled people, and 50% of the victims of police killings are disabled people. So my question is, how is he going to reckon with the disabled community who is already resistant to him and who has seen and been angry with him, particularly in New York, for all that he has done to disenfranchise disabled people, particularly disabled black people?
You know, on the incarceration issue, the incarceration rate in New York City dropped by 40% when Mike Bloomberg was president. Mayor, I'm sorry, when he was mayor. He was not randomly going around throwing people in jail, and no other big city in the United States saw its incarceration rate drop by that much. So the idea somehow that all of this was tied into putting more people in jail isn't true. And then secondarily, the criminal justice reform platform of this campaign is about getting people out of jail and lowering recidivism.
Well, I'm just saying that it's easy to throw that stat out because in the end that he did pull back on stop and frisk, but the rate of stop and frisk, which is a traumatic contact with police by an innocent person. There are people who were stopped and frisked a dozen times, which is I mean, I'm thankful that my sons were out of New York by then and not raised in a place where they could just walk around on the street and be stopped. This was an incredibly traumatizing thing. So even if people weren't ultimately arrested, you're talking about over the course of 2010, 30,000 stops and like 15 guns or something. I mean, this was a horrific practice. Whether or not the people were actually
I was just bringing up the incarceration. Sorry.
But that's not the only rate. But anyway, I want to I know Mitty has one more question.
I was just bringing up the issue of the incarceration rate because your other guest said Mike Bloomberg was running around throwing more and more people in jail, and that's just not true.
Let's pause it there. Okay, so that is a clip from AM Joy. That is from February 16th. That's from Sunday, February 16th. Bloomberg 2020 advisor on stop and frisk, sexism allegations, and more. Check that out at msnbc.com. Michael Bloomberg advisor you heard speaking is Tim O'Brien, author Tim O'Brien. You've heard me talk about him before. He wrote a book also about Donald Trump as well. So check out that clip. And we'll talk more about Bloomberg next week. We also know Dr. Jason Johnson. MSNBC has a good clip from the 11th hour from February 10th, 2020. Dr. Jason Johnson, political editor of The Root. Jason Johnson, this is a life or death election for black voters. The article I was referencing earlier about about Tony Rankins, who was a formerly homeless, drug-addicted Army veteran who was showcased at the State of the Union address by Donald Trump. He got a standing ovation at the State of the Union after Donald Trump described how he turned his life around thanks to a construction job at a company using the administration's Opportunity Zone tax breaks targeting poor neighborhoods. But it turns out that's not exactly what happened. Cincinnati.com exposes this in an article entitled "Trump's Story About Cincinnati Veterans Comeback Was Not Quite True." Trump's story about Cincinnati veterans comeback was not quite true, and come to find out the business was not in an empowerment zone. The way he framed this whole narrative is not exactly what happened. We're glad that Tony is back on his feet and off drugs, things like this. But once again, this is an example of a con man in using African Americans as props as well, as political props. Let me see here. Social Rankins was always, so in an interview with Associated Press, Tony Rankins said he always considered the job that launched him on his new life 2 years ago to be in an opportunity zone and was honored to be invited. Okay, days later, Trump doubled down. Let's see here. After struggling with drug addiction, Tony lost his job, his house, and his family. He was homeless, but when Tony found a construction company that invests in opportunity zones, quote, the president said on February 4th, he is now a top tradesman, etc. So they found out that actually when it comes to Trump's opportunity zone breaks, he said the company has only one building tapping the program now, a warehouse in Cincinnati where no one seems to be working, homeless or otherwise. This is from CEO Travis Steffens of the company where Tony works. Read this full article. This breaks this down. We have to get out of here. Stay tuned for Pastor Mo. We're out of time. Hey, thanks for listening to the African History Network show. We focus on educating, empowering, and inspiring people of African descent throughout the diaspora and around the world, because right now it's corrects wrong behaviors, not over till we win. Wakanda forever. We'll talk to you next week. Peace.